what the foreign affairs, this really the mouthpiece of the CIA, concludes is that if Israel is going to come out of this, it is going to have to resolve each front separately, and it's going to have to resolve each front separately with diplomacy. So all of this bluster in the article, oh, well, Israel, of course, needs to defeat Hamas. Of course, it needs to wage war against Hezbollah. It defends Israel to the teeth and then concludes that only diplomacy on each of these fronts can give Israel and, of course, the United States, its biggest allies, the time necessary to actually confront this. This, to me, seems to be a huge admission, Professor Marandi, of Israel's perilous situation. What do you make of this multi-front war that Israel, of resistance that Israel is currently facing? And perhaps you can comment on all these fronts in a bit more detail.
Well, if you recall earlier, I was saying how the United States and the Europeans, because they're the ones who are actually carrying out the war. Israel on its own can do nothing. If the Americans stop and the Europeans stop assisting the Israeli regime and stop providing them with the weapons and the ammunition and the financial assistance and the political cover to continue with this Holocaust, it would be over in a week. The regime would collapse. So this is a Western Holocaust. This is a Western genocide, the collective West, meaning the regimes, not the people. They are behind this. This is a war that the West is carrying out. Otherwise, the Israeli regime has shown itself to be weak and puny and incapable of continuing. Otherwise, they wouldn't have all these planes coming in day and night with American weapons. They wouldn't have all this financial. Americans are not selling them weapons. They're gifting them. They're giving these as gifts. And so are the Germans and the Europeans. So the Israelis have lost the war. They've lost it a long time ago. But if you recall, I was saying that the Americans and the Europeans are willing to give Hezbollah the world. Why? Because they want to cut down the number of fronts. They want to decrease the number of fronts. And this, I think, shows how heroic Hezbollah and the resistance and its supporters are in Lebanon. Not only are they being abused by the fascists in Lebanon who supported the Israeli invasion in 1982 and who continue to be traitors to the country, but the West is offering them everything that they would ever, they could never dream of getting the sort of concessions that they're being offered. All they have to do is just say, yes, we'll step back. But they won't do that because they're principled. So in certain ways, what they're doing is even more heroic in the sense that they are not willing to take concessions. They are willingly making sacrifices. I think that's something that history will remember. What Hezbollah and its supporters did. Every woman and child and man in Lebanon that's supporting, whether Christian, whether Sunni or Druze or Shia, or Palestinian or Lebanese, whoever is supporting the resistance in Lebanon, they're all a part of this. They're all heroes. The same is true in Yemen. The Americans are willing to give the Yemeni government, Ansarullah, everything that it wants. But they won't accept it. They say, no, the genocide, the Holocaust has to end. And of course, imagine if Syria was to change its policy. Imagine if Syria said, okay, no, you think the Americans would solve their problems. And of course, first and foremost is Iran. None of the members, none of the parties, none of the components of the axis of resistance will take one step back. The Holocaust, the genocide must end. Apartheid must end. And history will remember. Remember, for years, for decades, the West has always been talking to us about human rights and human values and freedom and democracy. But I think Gaza has proven everything. And I think all those people who've had many questions about Iran, and I'm not saying Iran is a utopia or Lebanon is a utopia or Syria is a utopia, but in the case of Iran, more specifically, for over 40 years, people have been only nasty and negative things about Iran and how horrible Iran is. But I think everyone has to rethink Iran, because let's look at Gaza. The West is supporting the genocide. Iran is standing up against genocide. Iran is making sacrifices, and Iran is unwilling to do a deal. Unwilling. That's why we have maximum pressure sanctions. That's why all, and don't think it's Israel that's carrying out attacks against Iran. All the Western intelligence agencies, the Five Eyes, including New Zealand, the Five Eyes, and Western governments, all of them are working together to gather intelligence against Iran. They're all working together against Iran for the sake of the Israeli regime. So Iran could get, imagine what concessions Iran could get, but Iran won't take them, because this is there's a principle here. The Palestinian people are human beings. We cannot turn away. We cannot ignore what's going on in Palestine. So Iran will continue with the resistance. All these fronts will continue to remain active, and the Israeli regime will have to pay the ultimate price, and that is ending ethno-supremacism and apartheid. That is the only way to end this. There is no other way. There is no other way that the Israeli regime can continue. Israel will never be like it was before October the 7th. That Israel is gone. And it's only going to go further downhill as we move forward. So the crazy fanatics aside, those who are more pragmatic in Israel should start rethinking. Those who just want a better life should leave. Those who are pragmatic should rethink, like the leaders in South Africa did, and look at the reality on the ground. And when that happens, those fanatics will not be enough in number to be able to sustain the regime.
I think those are excellent points, especially about your analysis of Hezbollah in particular, but really the entirety of the resistance. Surely the Americans, the United States, would love to negotiate some kind of pause. That's exactly what this Council on Foreign Relations article, the Foreign Affairs, that's what it's kind of saying is.
And that's what they've been doing. They've been trying to persuade Hezbollah or Syria or Yemen and Iran and others to shift away from the resistance. And they're willing to give a great deal, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and not only is not going to happen, but it is being pushed as if some kind of long war situation, maybe a lesser kinetic conflict for Israel, is actually in its best interest. But on the same front, the U.S. will acknowledge that Israel's own capabilities are surely unable to absorb the stress of having to fight at any level on this number of fronts. But that's seemingly where this is going. Professor Marandi, where do you see this future for Israel and this conflict generally? Because what I see is, as you said, all of these fronts are going to continue, but that is not sustainable in the least. So something has got to give.
Well, it doesn't matter who is in the White House. The United States is declining. Relatively speaking, it's on the decline. It has huge internal problems, economic problems, and it is isolated across the world. Europe is in far worse shape than the United States. And these are the regimes that sustain Israel. So as these regimes go downhill, and remember, it's not just Gaza, it's China, it's Ukraine, it's they're facing, and it's countries across the global south that are moving closer to each other. BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, other regional organizations, they are going to gradually, I'm not saying it's going to happen overnight, but gradually they're going to become closer. They're going to find means to do trade and business without the West being able to interfere. It may take time, but it's happening, and the Americans are pushing the world in that direction. So the Americans and the West are going to decline. Where does the Israeli regime get its support? It gets it from the West. It's a weak and vulnerable and small regime, as we were discussing earlier. Without the West, they cannot continue this war for a week. It would be over. So it doesn't matter if Trump's in the White House or Harris is in the White House. The reality on the ground is that the Israeli regime and its Western backers are on the decline, and that the world despises this regime. Even in the United States, you see people on the right and the left how they're making they're being removed from YouTube, regardless of what we may think about the politics of different people. But they attack the Israeli regime for what it's doing, and they're being removed. All of this is exposing the West more and more than ever before. It's showing how brutal and barbaric these regimes are. It shows how fundamentally hostile they are towards human rights. It shows that the liberals in the United States are as fascistic as any other fascist group in human history, because they're supporting this genocide. They're behind the genocide. They're with the genocide, whether it's Christian Zionists or liberals in the United States. But the population in the United States is turning against it, whether Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or anyone else, people from all walks of life. And that's what's happening across the world. So the Israeli regime doesn't have a future. And that we see no sign of a ceasefire. The longer the war continues, the worse it is for the Israeli regime, because they have the most to lose. Lebanon, people die, it hurts the economy, but the Israeli economy is being devastated. They had a much larger economy. In Yemen, people die, people suffer, but the economy in Yemen has already been destroyed and devastated. So Israel, the Israeli regime, loses more than anyone else. So and then if the regime expands the war, it only makes it worse for itself. It cannot escape defeat. So the longer this goes, the more diminished the regime becomes, and the longer this goes, the weaker its backers are, because the war in Ukraine is not going well. The confrontation with China is not going well. The confrontation with the global South is not going well, hence BRICS and other regional organizations. So it's not looking good for the West, and it's definitely not looking good at all for the Israeli regime. And I think Israelis, should start leaving. The Zionists should start leaving. It's not going to end well for the regime. Or of course, those Jews who are opposed to Zionism in Israel, hopefully they will be able to convince more people to turn away from this cult. But the Zionists should leave, because Israel is never going to be what it was before.
Yeah, and maybe to close on this point of Israel, because I do want to talk about this multipolar world that you mentioned. But I wanted to read this interesting quote to conclude the article I was referencing in Foreign Affairs about the coming long war. It says, to win a long-term intensive multi-front war, Israel would have to increase defense budgets, open new lines of productions for munitions, harden its critical national infrastructure, and expand its pool of recruitment to additional parts of Israeli society. And then it makes a point about the most critical front being the home front. And I wanted your final comment on this, because a lot is made about Israel's own internal divisions. But how do you see all of this relating to this broader crisis of legitimacy that you speak of, and the dangers of its future? Because oftentimes it seems like this internal division focuses far more on the perhaps the effectiveness of the Israeli regime in committing all of this destruction, rather than actually ending the destructive and genocidal policy itself. What have you made of Israelis' internal divisions?
Well, when this is a manufactured country, this is not a real country. People have come across the world, and that the divisions inside occupied Palestine are very deep. But as you know, the people who protest against Netanyahu, They are not pro-Palestinian. They are Zionists and they are ethnic supremacists, and most of them support the genocide. There are Jews in Israel who are deeply opposed to Zionism and who are opposed to all of this. We always have to keep that in mind, but they're a small minority, at least for now. But what the article ignores or pretends to ignore is that these divisions are huge, and they are going to become more problematic as the regime declines. And the regime will continue to decline. As I said, every day that the war continues, it will decline. They will kill Palestinians. They will slaughter women and children, and they will call that a success because they're racist. And the West will be silent about it. The BBC, CNN, Fox News, left and right, there are no left and right, but they'll all be silent, or they'll all try to justify that what the Israeli regime does as much as possible. It will continue. But the regime is declining. And so as it declines, these divisions become more dangerous, without a doubt. But what this article ignores, and I think it chooses to ignore, is that the Israeli regime is not fighting this war on its own. The West is carrying out this genocide. The West is funding this genocide. The regime is completely reliant on Western armaments to bomb women and children, on Western ammunition, on Western financial assistance, and Western political cover. Remember, if in Iran, if a single person allegedly dies because of police brutality, which, as I said, there was never any evidence of that happening, the West mobilized against Iran, sanctions after sanctions. It was never about Iranian women or Iran human rights. It was about destroying the resistance. In Israel, they carry out genocide. Where are the sanctions? There are no sanctions. They will assist the genocide. They're giving them armaments. They're giving them ammunition. They're giving them political cover. The Western media is collectively helping the Israeli regime as much as possible. They've exposed themselves. This is not the free world. This is not democracy. This is not. They're shutting people down on YouTube, the electronic intifada. Even people from the right, Candace Owens. You may not agree with different people on different issues, but the point is that they're exposing themselves to their own people and to the world. So this is not the regime is completely dependent, and the West, by assisting the regime, is weakening itself because it's exposing itself to the world. But in any case, the article is total nonsense. The Israeli regime is not fighting the war. The collective West is carrying out this genocide and fighting this war.
Yes, and I think it's important to note all of those instances of suppression, Professor Marandi, because there are some friends too, like Richard Medhurst, as well
That's right.
as
That's right.
Sarah Wilkinson,
Absolutely.
and so many others that
So
are facing
Richard,
huge consequences.
yes, Richard is obviously he's giving his opinion on he's protesting against genocide. He's being punished against genocide. And the same is true with the other Palestinian activists or pro-Palestinian activists. You don't see any of this in the Western media. You don't see these people being on the BBC or Channel 4 News or CNN or Fox News or the New York Times or the Guardian. They're all erased. And that, I think, that says everything you need to know about Western media. And then, they're intimidating them. They intimidate Richard so that he cannot say what he feels he needs to say, and then they intimidate everyone else because everyone else becomes more careful about what they say. And X is not an exception, and none of them are exception. They're just different factions of the same political regime, and they will, as things stand, they will continue to become more aggressive in silencing. And the amazing thing is that these people are not criticizing the UK. They're not criticizing the United States for its internal politics. They're saying, stop supporting this Holocaust. Stop slaughtering Palestinians, and they're being shut down. Stop the slaughter in this other country, in this other part of the world. The West cannot tolerate that. You don't see Richard or others, talking about events and all that much about events in the UK or France, or their focus is on Palestine. That's what they've been doing for the last 11 months. But they have to be quiet. It's extraordinary. It's really extraordinary. I think the masks have all been removed. And I think that all those people who have questions, all they have to do is look at Gaza and say, who is supporting the Palestinians and who is opposing the Palestinians? And then you know who are the good guys and who are the bad guys.